The life you're living may not be yours. Imagine waking up one morning with a strange, unsettling clarity. Not panic, not fear, just a quiet realization that lingers longer than it should. The feeling that the life you've been living might not actually be yours. That the choices you've made, the beliefs you defend, the ambitions that push you forward may not have emerged from the deepest part of who you are, but from expectations you never consciously agreed to. From conditioning absorbed so early it now feels like truth. From invisible pressures that shaped you before you had language to question them. Now pause and ask yourself something slowly, honestly. How much of who you are today feels authentic? And how much feels functional? How often do you feel like you're playing a role, performing a version of yourself that works, but doesn't feel entirely real? Carl Jung believed that most people never live their own lives. They live adaptations. And he warned that this adaptation, when taken too far, comes at a psychological cost. Because life, he said, does not truly begin until you find yourself. But what does that mean? Is it just self-awareness? Understanding your habits, your personality, your past? Or is it something far more disturbing and far more transformative? Stay with me, because before we can talk about finding yourself, we have to understand how you got lost. From the moment you entered the world, you were shaped. Not violently, not maliciously, quietly. You were given a name, an identity, a set of expectations. You learned what was rewarded and what was corrected, what emotions were acceptable, which ones made others uncomfortable. And because belonging is tied to survival, you adapted. You learned to read the room, to adjust your tone, to hide certain impulses. Perhaps you were told not to be so sensitive, or not to dream too big, or not to question authority. And each time that happened, a small part of you stepped back, not erased, just hidden. Jung believed this process happened so gradually that most people never notice it. They don't remember choosing the mask. They simply wake up one day wearing it. He called this mask the persona. The persona is not false. It is necessary. It allows you to function in society, to work, to relate, to be accepted. But the danger begins when you forget that it is a mask. When you begin to believe that what you show is all that you are. At that point, something subtle happens. You stop asking whether your life feels aligned. You start asking whether it looks successful. And the deeper self, the one beneath the persona, begins to feel distant. Not gone, distant. This is why so many people feel restless even when everything looks right on the outside. They followed the script. They did what was expected, and yet something feels missing. Jung would say that this feeling is not confusion. It is memory. Because beneath the persona lives another realm. Everything you were never allowed to be. Everything you learned to suppress. Everything that didn't fit. Jung called this the shadow. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. The shadow is not just your fears or weaknesses. It also contains your intensity, your truth, your untapped strength. But because it was rejected early, you learned to push it out of awareness. You didn't destroy it. You buried it. And buried things don't disappear. They act from underground. They influence your reactions, your attractions, your aversions. Have you ever felt an unusually strong emotional reaction to someone's behavior and couldn't explain why? Have certain traits in others triggered irritation, judgment, or discomfort that felt disproportionate? Jung believed that what disturbs us in others often lives unrecognized within ourselves. This is projection, the psyche's way of avoiding confrontation with the shadow. And here's the part most people never hear. The shadow doesn't sabotage you out of malice. It acts because it wants to be seen. At this point, many people make a mistake. They try to fix themselves, to get rid of uncomfortable traits, to become more acceptable. But Jung believed this approach only deepens the split. Because growth is not about elimination. It's about integration. The parts of you that feel uncomfortable, contradictory, or unwanted are not obstacles. They are messages. And until you listen, they will continue to express themselves indirectly. Through anxiety, through self-sabotage, through relationships that never quite satisfy. This is why so many people feel lost, even when they are busy. Why silence feels threatening. Why distraction becomes addictive. Because silence invites the shadow to speak. And most people aren't ready to listen. Think about how often we avoid being alone with our thoughts. We fill every gap, every pause, every quiet moment. Not because we're lazy, but because something waits beneath the noise. Questions we don't want to ask, doubts we don't want to feel, a sense that the life we're living might be built on borrowed values. Jung believed that the unconscious is always communicating, but it speaks in sensations before it speaks in words. Restlessness, discomfort, longing, that deep, unexplainable sense that there is more to you than the life you're currently inhabiting. And that sense is not imagination. It is the beginning of individuation. Individuation is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming whole. It is the slow, often uncomfortable process of reclaiming what was split off, of questioning inherited beliefs, of confronting inner contradictions. And this is exactly where most people stop, because facing yourself is far more difficult than improving yourself. Improvement keeps the mask intact. Integration dissolves it. And the moment you begin to question who you are, not in theory, but in experience, something inside you resists. Fear appears, doubt rises, old patterns tighten their grip. This resistance is not failure. It is a sign that you're approaching something real. And here is where we pause, because everything we've explored so far is only the outer layer of the journey. We've talked about conditioning, the persona, the shadow, but we haven't yet touched the deeper forces that pull you forward even when fear holds you back. We haven't spoken about the inner patterns that shape your destiny without your permission, the ancient structures within you that Jung believed were older than culture itself. Because beneath your personal story lies something far more powerful. And until you understand it, the question, "Who am I?" will never fully settle. That is where the journey truly deepens. And that is where we'll go next when you're ready. If you stayed with this until now, it means something inside you already recognizes the pattern. Because the discomfort you may be feeling is not confusion, it's proximity. You are getting closer to something real. In the first movement of this journey, we spoke about how you were shaped, how the persona formed, how the shadow was buried rather than destroyed. But now we must go deeper. Because even when people begin to sense that the life they're living doesn't fully belong to them, they still ask the wrong question. They ask, "How do I change?" But Jung would say that change is not the beginning. Understanding is. And to understand yourself, you must first see the invisible forces that have been influencing you long before you made your first conscious decision. Carl Jung believed that beneath personal history lies something older, something collective. He called it the collective unconscious, a deep psychological layer shared by all human beings, shaped not by your individual experiences, but by patterns inherited across generations. This is where archetypes live, not as ideas, not as metaphors, but as living psychological forces. And whether you are aware of them or not, they are already active in your life. Think about the stories that have survived thousands of years. The hero who feels called to something greater, the mentor who appears at the threshold, the monster guarding the treasure, the fall, the rebirth. These stories repeat because they are not inventions. They are expressions of inner reality. Jung believed that your psyche is structured in the same way, which means that when you feel a pull toward growth, toward meaning, toward something more, that is not random. It is the hero archetype awakening within you. But here is what most people don't realize. The hero never awakens alone. The moment the call appears, so does resistance. Fear, doubt, self-sabotage. This resistance is not weakness. It is the shadow stepping forward. In myth, the shadow appears as the dragon, the enemy, the darkness that must be faced. In real life, it appears as procrastination, rationalization, the voice that says, "Not now. Who do you think you are? Stay where it's safe." This is why people repeat patterns even when they consciously want to change. They are not lazy. They are standing at the edge of transformation without understanding the forces at play. Most people make the same mistake here. They try to overpower the shadow. They shame it, suppress it, pretend it shouldn't exist. But you'll warn that what you suppress does not disappear. It becomes autonomous. It begins to run your life from behind the scenes. True transformation does not happen when the hero destroys the shadow. It happens when the hero understands it. Because within the shadow are qualities you were never allowed to embody. Strength that was called aggression, sensitivity that was called weakness, intuition that was called irrational. When you rejected those traits, they didn't vanish. They went underground. And now they want integration. Let's make this concrete. Take self-doubt. Most people see it as an enemy, something to overcome, something to silence. But Jung would ask a different question. Where did that doubt come from? Was it truly yours? Or was it inherited from voices that once had power over you? And more importantly, what does it protect? Often, self-doubt carries hidden intelligence. It slows you down, forces reflection, prevents blind arrogance. When integrated, it becomes discernment. But when rejected, it becomes paralysis. This is the pattern repeated across the psyche. The thing you fear most often holds the key to your next evolution.